Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Lazaro Constanza Wash Process Guatemala from Roseline Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Roseline, based out of Portland, Oregon. And they're a coffee roaster that has appeared on this channel numerous times before. However, it has been about a year since we've last featured them on this channel. So when one of our subscribers, Benjamin, was down in Portland and offered to bring us back a bag of one of Roseline's coffees, I took a look through their current offerings to see which one interested me the most. And this is the one that caught my attention, as it very much sounded like my type of Central American coffee. So I'm looking forward to revisiting Roseline, as this right here is day 44. And recipe we went with for this coffee is our standard recipe, a 16:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for this coffee, so Roseline definitely roasts on the lighter side of things compared to a lot of other American coffee roasters. This one, on the other hand, wasn't quite as light as some of the other previous experiences I've had with some of their coffees. So this one still, by most standards and metrics, would be on the lighter side of something like a light medium in terms of the roast profile. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 24, first impression, and the cup was wonderfully sweet all around, as it had a very cookie-like finish, but the honeysuckle was also quite lively and vibrant within the cup. It really did skew a lot in terms of the sugary side of things, and it left a fair bit of brightness to it as well. So having a lot of these sugary aspects right off the bat left a very positive first impression. Day 28, ran it through the V60 in a very similar cup, and what I could say at this time was a very pronounced nougat component that was also still in line with this sugary cookie aspect present right at the forefront. A little less rounded in terms of the brightness, however, it's still present if not quite as pronounced, and it continues to remain a very sweet coffee. Day 28 increased the temperatures, and it wasn't quite as structured when increasing the temperatures, as the apple acidity did become the more dominant factor within this coffee. That's not necessarily what I was looking for. I was really enjoying the sweetness from the start of this coffee. There's a slight bit less of that cookie sweetness. It feels a little bit more toned down in place of a lot more brightness. Day 32, back through the V60, and the coffee is kind of refusing to taper off, and I was kind of surprised, honestly. I got this coffee a little later than I would typically start with something like Roseline. So day 32, I kind of expected this coffee might start to taper off. However, it continues to remain consistent, as the cookie sweetness, nougat, remains on the forefront with the brightness on the back end. Very well structured, very well balanced coffee in general, as those things continue to remain consistent throughout the entirety of drinking this coffee. The only thing that really seemed to impact that was some slight tinkering and adjusting here and there. Day 34 continues to remain the same, as there's a slight increase in the overall vibrancy, if anything. So this coffee at this time was actually still improving. Really sweet throughout the entirety, with the nougaty aspect continuing to remain on the forefront, with plenty of brightness still present on the back end. Little has changed to this day. We continue on to day 36, which was the best day of the coffee to this point. And this is when I really decided to settle on the Chemex for this one, as the sweetness and clarity were both in very high measure, as the entire cup had a wonderful candy bar-like sweetness with an emphasis on the nougat and even a brown candy-like aspect. That might be attributed to the roaster. They are a Probat roaster, and that's one of the reasons I've always really liked their coffees. It can lead to some very sweet coffees, especially for Central American ones. Great florality, sweetness as well. So all around, a lot of sweetness that I'm very much enjoying, with a lot of clarity to complement that. Day 38. The cup finally seems to have tapered off ever so slightly at this time, as it's not quite as sweet through the V60. Still very much in line with a lot of those candy bar characteristics I've experienced earlier. That, of course, being that nougat, that kind of brown candy caramel aspect, and then a little bit of chocolate too. Brightness also feels slightly more diluted, with the nougat sweetness still the most pronounced component, even if not quite as vibrant as previous days. Day 41, the coffee definitely feels a little bit past its best. Definitely the case here on day 44 as well, as it's skewing a little bit more on the brighter aspect side of things, with a little less defined of that kind of apple-like acidity. It's still present to a slightly more subtle, robust base, as the apple acidity now at this time is the most prominent aspect, with a little less of that candy bar sweetness. All right, so let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And we have quite a few level 4s, so let's go through those real quick. We will start with the cleanliness level 4. I think I wanted to start here because that's not surprising in any sense. It's a washed Central American coffee, and there was nothing really kind of to discuss in that sense. Very clean coffee in general. Not too much to say on that. Finish, level 4. Yes, I'd kind of mentioned that it has a lot of sweeter aspects, some sweeter components to this one, and most distinctly thinking of that kind of sugary cookie aspect, that nougat aspect, that seemed to be quite lasting in addition to the brightness that was present within this coffee. So those two things in about equal measure, just sometimes skewing a little bit more in one direction or the other, but definitely a higher side on that finish. Sweetness, level 4. Yes, and I could possibly even justify our higher side of that level 4 if we're comparing it relative to other Central American coffees. This was a very sweet Central American coffee, and that was one of my favorite parts of this one is the sweetness. Definitely justified at that level 4 mark. Acidity, the brightness, level 4. Interestingly, I would say it's on the slightly lower side of the level 4. There were times where I could pull more out of the brightness to it, the acidity to it, but not to the same extent as I've experienced from so many of Roseline's previous coffees. I've heard from some people that have taken to Roseline that they found the brightness and acidity to be a little bit too much for them. This coffee, I don't think a lot of people would feel that way on. As mentioned, it just felt a little bit more developed than I think I've had from a lot of their previous coffees. Florality, level 4. Yes, I really enjoyed the floral aspect within this one. They list honeysuckle. I think it's a little bit of a stretch, a little bit of a priming effect for me to feel the honeysuckle in this one because I've had so many coffees that have a very strong and distinct honeysuckle-like aspect. This one right here, it felt like a little bit more generic of a sweeter floral component to it. I could see it definitely justified at the level 4. Very nice aspect to it. It's kind of that just generic florality within a Central American coffee. Caramel, level 4, yes, and that oftentimes is associated with the Probat, which can have a very caramel-like aspect within the coffees. So that right there, I could definitely see it, and it did help that it was a Central American coffee as well, and that's why the chocolate is also there at that level 3 mark, a fair bit of that complementary in the cup. Body, level 3, and yes, that's likely due to it being with the Chemex. Even then, it still had a fair bit of body to it. I can't quite recall if it would justify level 4 through other brew methods, but as far as the Chemex goes, it still had at least a medium level for the body. Citrus, level 3. And that, of course, is attributed to that kind of apple-like brightness that's present within the coffee. Best place to put it is in the citrus. Definitely not quite as pronounced as a lot of the more Central American characteristics. The chocolate, that kind of nougat, that kind of caramel. So it still earns that level 3 mark, even if not quite as high as a lot of the other factors within this coffee. So I think I quite like the way that this tasting wheel looks. I think it's a pretty good representation of what I was experiencing from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, I have quite a few. So I think one thing I wanted to start off with is Guatemala, to this point, has been having a pretty good year for me. I think Guatemala might end up having a really good year in general, as every Guatemalan coffee I've had up to this point is one that I've at the very least enjoyed. This one right here is one of my more enjoyable Guatemalan coffees I've had in quite a while, and I'll attribute that to a very high level of sweetness as well as a very high level of clarity, and very much being in line with the type of Guatemalan coffees that I enjoy in general. And the second thing I wanted to say about this coffee is Roseline continues to stand the test of time. So there are certain coffee roasters that I've been drinking for a very long time, most notably thinking, of course, of Sweet Bloom, Onyx, and then the two that have continued to stand the test of time, Passenger and Roseline. No matter how many years it's been, no matter how many other coffee roasters I've had, I continue to really enjoy the coffees that both Passenger and Roseline are putting out. So famously, we put Roseline in the world-class category on our last American coffee roaster tier list. And I feel like they continue to justify that mark, as every coffee I've had from them has been a coffee that I've very much enjoyed. This one right here is no exception. I could easily see this one making our top 10 coffees of the year list, if not in the top 10 itself, but in the honorable mentions category. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, if you do like slightly lighter but more traditional Central American component coffees, this one right here has that. And definitely keep in mind a lot of the sweeter aspects, because that's kind of my type of Central American coffee in general, is something that may be a little bit lighter. At the same time, it doesn't necessarily have too much brightness, but in its place it has a lot of sweetness, and it has a lot of very distinct, stronger candied components to it in general. And that's this one right here. I think that's kind of the best way I can direct somebody on this coffee, and I think I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this one, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Lazaro Constanza Wash Process Guatemala from Roseline Coffee. Thank you for watching.